2 years after the Griffin HX-9 incident, Maya stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, wearing her best suit and feeling simultaneously honored and overwhelmed. The president was about to present her with the National Cybersecurity Achievement Award, recognizing her role in preventing what intelligence analysts had determined would have been one of the most devastating cyber attacks in military history. The ceremony was attended by dozens of cybersecurity professionals, military leaders, and government officials who had come to recognize not just Maya's technical achievements, but the broader cultural changes her story had inspired across the defense establishment. General Morrison stood in the front row, having specifically requested permission to attend the ceremony. Maya Chen represents the best of American innovation and courage, the president said during the presentation. Her story reminds us that expertise and integrity matter more than hierarchy and conventional thinking. She saw a problem that others missed, had the courage to speak up when others tried to silence her, and ultimately saved countless American lives through her persistence and skill. As Maya shook hands with the president and accepted the award, she thought about how far she had traveled from that small computer repair shop where she had first learned to question assumptions and dig deeper when something didn't seem right. Her parents sat in the audience, their faces glowing with pride as they watched their daughter receive recognition at the highest levels of government. The ceremony was followed by a reception where Maya found herself surrounded by admirers and colleagues, but the conversation that meant the most to her was with a young Air Force lieutenant who approached her nervously during a quiet moment. "Ms. Chen," the lieutenant said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. I'm working on a project right now where I've identified some potential security issues, but my commanding officer keeps telling me I'm being too cautious. Your story has given me the courage to keep pushing for a proper investigation." Maya smiled and handed the lieutenant her business card. "Call me directly if you need support," she said. "We've created formal channels now for people in your situation. No one should have to fight alone when they're trying to protect our systems and our people." The lieutenant's eyes widened with relief and gratitude. "You mean there are actually procedures in place now? People won't think I'm being insubordinate if I report concerns through official channels?" "That's exactly what we've built," Maya replied. "The Cyber Threat Assessment Division has liaisons in every major military unit and defense contractor organization. If someone tries to silence you for reporting legitimate security concerns, we have the authority to investigate and ensure your findings get proper attention." Maya's work with the Cyber Threat Assessment Division had indeed revolutionized how the military handled cybersecurity concerns. The organization had identified and addressed over 200 vulnerabilities in its first 2 years of operation, preventing attacks that could have compromised everything from supply chain logistics to nuclear weapons systems. More importantly, the cultural changes Maya had championed were spreading throughout the defense establishment. Young engineers and analysts no longer feared career retaliation for questioning senior leaders or challenging established protocols. The Griffin protocols, as they had come to be known, required that all security concerns be investigated by independent teams with direct reporting lines to senior leadership. Dr. Harrison had become one of Maya's strongest allies in implementing these changes. His experience of nearly causing a disaster through his dismissal of Maya's warnings had transformed him from an arrogant project leader into a humble advocate for intellectual diversity and critical thinking. Maya changed not just our organization, but our entire approach to leadership, Dr. Harrison had said during a recent industry conference. She taught us that our job as senior engineers is not to have all the answers, but to create environments where the right answers can emerge from anywhere in our teams. Maya's success had also opened doors for other underrepresented voices in cybersecurity and defense technology. The scholarship program she had established helped dozens of students from backgrounds similar to her own pursue careers in fields where they had previously felt unwelcome or unprepared. One of her scholarship recipients, a young woman from a farming community in rural Texas, had just completed her master's degree in cybersecurity and accepted a position with a major defense contractor. She sent Maya regular updates about her work, including recent discoveries of vulnerabilities in agricultural technology systems that could potentially be exploited to disrupt food supplies. "I probably never would have even considered this field," If I hadn't read about your story, the student wrote in her latest email, you showed me that being different and thinking differently could be strengths rather than weaknesses in this work. As the White House reception wound down, Maya found herself in conversation with Colonel Reeves, who had recently been promoted to general and was leading the military's new Integrated Cyber Defense Command. Maya, I've been thinking about our next challenge, General Reeves said. We've done excellent work building systems to identify and address vulnerabilities in our current technologies. But what about the threats we haven't imagined yet? How do we prepare for attacks that use methods we've never seen before? Maya's eyes lit up with excitement. That's exactly what I've been working on. We're developing simulation systems that can model entirely new types of attacks, including some that use artificial intelligence and quantum computing, in ways that current security protocols weren't designed to handle. Tell me more, General Reeves said, leaning forward with interest. We're creating virtual environments where we can test our systems against theoretical future threats, Maya explained. Instead of waiting for new vulnerabilities to be discovered, in the real world, we're trying to discover them in controlled environments where we can develop countermeasures before the threats actually emerge. General Reeves nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like you're applying the same forward-thinking approach that identified the Griffin vulnerability, but on a much larger scale. Exactly. The Griffin incident taught us that the most dangerous threats are often the ones that seem impossible until someone proves they're not. Our job is to imagine those seemingly impossible scenarios and prepare for them before our enemies do. As Maya drove home from the White House that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young engineer who had been dismissed and marginalized for questioning authority had become a respected leader whose voice carried weight at the highest levels of government. But the recognition and success, while gratifying, were not what motivated her most. What drove Maya was the knowledge that her work was making a real difference in protecting people's lives and preserving national security. Every vulnerability identified, every attack prevented, every young engineer empowered to speak up represented lives that might have been lost and disasters that had been averted. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from her parents, who had returned home after the ceremony. "We are so proud of you," her mother had written. "You have used your talents not just to succeed but to make the world safer for everyone." As Maya pulled into her driveway, she looked up at the stars visible in the clear night sky and thought about all the young engineers working late in labs and offices around the world, trying to solve complex problems and protect critical systems. She hoped that her story would continue to inspire them to trust their instincts, question authority when necessary, and never give up when they believed they had found something important. The Griffin HX-9 incident had started as Maya's greatest professional crisis, but it had ultimately become the foundation for a career dedicated to ensuring that critical voices were heard and that technical expertise triumphed over organizational politics. In a field where the stakes were often life and death, that mission felt like the most important work she could possibly do. The weeks following the successful defense of forward operating Base Delta brought dramatic changes to Maya's life. What had started as a routine security testing assignment had transformed her from an overlooked junior engineer into one of the most sought-after cybersecurity experts in the defense industry. General Morrison herself called Maya personally to thank her for her role in saving the base. "Ms. Chen," the general said during their video conference, "your courage in speaking truth to power even when it cost you professionally exemplifies the best traditions of service to our country. Without your persistence and expertise, we would have lost not just the battle, but potentially hundreds of American lives." The recognition was overwhelming for someone who had spent months being dismissed and marginalized by her colleagues. Maya found herself invited to brief senior Defense Department officials, testify before congressional committees, and consult on cybersecurity vulnerabilities across multiple military systems. But the most satisfying change was the transformation in how her colleagues treated her. Dr. Harrison, who had spent so much energy dismissing her concerns, now sought her input on every major security decision. The other engineers who had once ignored her now hung on her every word during technical meetings. Maya, Dr. Peterson approached her one morning looking genuinely remorseful. "I want to apologize for how we treated you. We let our egos and preconceptions blind us to the value of your insights. I hope you can forgive us and help us build a better culture in this organization." Maya appreciated the apology, but she was more focused on ensuring that the structural problems that had led to the Griffin HX9 crisis were addressed systematically. She worked with Colonel Reeves to develop new protocols for handling security concerns, regardless of who raised them or how junior they might be in the organizational hierarchy. The investigation into the original Griffin HX9 vulnerability had revealed that the security flaw was not an accident. The mathematical error in the quantum encryption algorithm had been deliberately introduced by a foreign intelligence service that had infiltrated the original development team years earlier. The attackers had been playing a long game, waiting for the right moment to exploit their carefully planted backdoor. Maya's discovery had not only prevented a tactical disaster, but had also uncovered one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in recent memory. The counterintelligence investigation that followed led to the identification and arrest of several foreign agents who had been operating within the defense contractor community for years. As Maya's reputation grew, she faced difficult decisions about her career path. Major defense contractors offered her lucrative positions with signing bonuses that would have made her parents' sacrifices seem worthwhile overnight. Silicon Valley tech companies wanted to hire her to lead their cybersecurity divisions. Government agencies offered her roles that would put her at the center of national security decision-making. But Maya found herself drawn to a different opportunity. Colonel Reeves had been tasked with creating a new cybersecurity unit within the military, one specifically designed to identify and address vulnerabilities before they could be exploited by hostile actors. She wanted Maya to help design and lead this organization. "We need people who understand that security isn't just about following protocols," Colonel Reeves explained during one of their planning sessions. "We need people who can think like attackers, who question assumptions, and who have the courage to speak up when they find problems. Your experience with the Griffin situation taught us that sometimes the most important insights come from unexpected sources." Maya accepted the position, recognizing that it would give her the platform to prevent future crises while building an organization that valued diverse perspectives and critical thinking over hierarchical deference. The new unit, designated Cyber Threat Assessment Division, became Maya's laboratory for revolutionizing how the military approached cybersecurity. She recruited a diverse team of experts from different backgrounds: former hackers who understood criminal methodology, academic researchers who could identify theoretical vulnerabilities, and experienced military personnel who understood operational requirements. Maya insisted that the unit operate with flat hierarchies where good ideas could come from anyone, regardless of their rank or experience level. She established protocols that required all security concerns to be investigated thoroughly, with clear documentation of why issues were dismissed if they proved unfounded. "We're not just building a cybersecurity organization," Maya told her new team during their first meeting. "We're building a culture where intellectual honesty and critical thinking are more important than protecting egos or maintaining comfortable assumptions." The division's first major success came when one of Maya's newest recruits, a recent college graduate with a background in artificial intelligence, identified vulnerabilities in the military's autonomous vehicle systems. Unlike Maya's experience with the Griffin project, this time the concerns were taken seriously from day one, leading to critical security improvements before the systems were deployed. Maya also found time to return to the defense facility where her career had nearly been destroyed. She had been invited to speak to the engineering teams about lessons learned from the Griffin HX9 incident. Standing in the same conference room where her security warnings had been dismissed months earlier, Maya looked out at an audience that included all of her former colleagues. Dr. Harrison sat in the front row, no longer the arrogant project leader who had tried to silence her, but a chastened professional who was genuinely trying to learn from his mistakes. "The most important lesson from the Griffin incident," Maya told the group, "is that cybersecurity threats don't respect organizational hierarchies. A vulnerability discovered by a junior engineer is just as dangerous as one found by a senior architect. Our job is to create systems and cultures that can recognize and respond to threats regardless of their source." She spoke about the importance of intellectual humility, of creating environments where questioning assumptions was encouraged rather than punished. She talked about the dangers of dismissing concerns based on the credentials or experience level of the person raising them. "I'm not here to blame anyone for what happened," Maya concluded. "We all made mistakes during the Griffin project, but the real tragedy would be if we didn't learn from those mistakes and build better systems going forward." After her presentation, several junior engineers approached Maya privately to thank her for speaking up. They shared their own stories of having security concerns dismissed or minimized by senior colleagues who were more focused on meeting deadlines than addressing potential vulnerabilities. Maya realized that her experience with the Griffin HX9 project was not unique. Across the defense industry, talented engineers were being silenced by organizational cultures that prioritized hierarchy over expertise and comfort over critical analysis. She began developing training programs that could be implemented across military and contractor organizations, designed to help senior leaders recognize and respond appropriately to security concerns raised by their teams. The programs emphasized the importance of creating psychological safety for employees who identified potential problems, even when those problems challenged existing assumptions or threatened project timelines. Maya's work caught the attention of international cybersecurity organizations, who invited her to share her experiences at conferences around the world. She became a sought-after speaker on topics ranging from technical vulnerability assessment to organizational culture and leadership in high-stakes environments. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Maya received a letter from a young engineer in South Korea who had read about her story in a professional journal. The engineer described how Maya's example had given her the courage to persist in reporting a critical vulnerability in her company's software, despite facing dismissal and ridicule from her supervisors. "Your story showed me that sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything," the engineer wrote. "But it also showed me that integrity and technical expertise will ultimately be recognized, even if it takes time." Maya kept that letter on her desk as a reminder of why her work mattered. The Griffin HX9 incident had taught her that cybersecurity was about more than just protecting computer systems. It was about protecting people, and that responsibility required not just technical skill, but also moral courage. As she looked back on the journey that had brought her from a dismissed junior engineer to a respected leader in cybersecurity, Maya understood that her greatest achievement was not preventing a single attack or saving one general's life. Her greatest achievement was helping to change how organizations thought about security, expertise, and the value of diverse perspectives in solving complex problems. The war room at the Pentagon had been transformed into a 24-hour command center, with multiple screens showing real-time intelligence from Forward Operating Base Delta. Maya sat at a workstation surrounded by some of the military's top cybersecurity experts, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she implemented the most complex deception operation of her career. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. Maya had to simultaneously maintain the compromised Griffin HX9 system, feeding false information to the attackers, while establishing a secure parallel communication channel that could reach General Morrison without detection. Any mistake could alert the enemy that their infiltration had been discovered, potentially triggering an immediate attack before the base was ready. Colonel Reeves stood behind Maya, watching the streams of data flowing across her screens. "Status report, Ms. Chen. Are we ready to begin the deception protocol?" Maya checked her monitors one final time, verifying that all systems were functioning correctly. "The false intelligence package is ready for transmission. I've created fake troop movement orders that will make it appear we're concentrating our forces on the eastern perimeter. If the attackers act on this information, they'll assault our strongest defensive position, while General Morrison can prepare a counterattack from the west. And the secure channel to the general? Operational, through an old emergency radio frequency that predates the Griffin system. It's not sophisticated, but it's completely isolated from any network they could have compromised." Maya paused, double-checking her calculations one more time. "Colonel, once we start this operation, we'll be completely committed. If something goes wrong, I understand the risks, Ms. Chen, but right now this is General Morrison's best chance of survival. Begin transmission of the false intelligence." Maya activated the deception protocol, watching as carefully crafted fake orders began flowing through the compromised Griffin HX9 system. To anyone monitoring the network traffic, it would appear that forward operating base Delta was preparing for an attack from the wrong direction, leaving what seemed like a perfect opportunity for a surprise assault. Simultaneously, Maya began transmitting real intelligence through the emergency radio channel. The messages were brief and coded, designed to sound like routine maintenance communications to anyone who might intercept them. But General Morrison would recognize the predetermined warning signals that indicated her primary communication system had been compromised. Hours passed in tense silence as they waited for confirmation that their messages had reached their destination. Maya monitored the compromised system continuously, watching for any sign that the attackers suspected the deception. The network traffic patterns remained consistent, suggesting that the enemy was accepting the false intelligence at face value. Finally, a coded response came through the emergency channel. General Morrison had received their warnings and understood the situation. She was repositioning her forces accordingly, preparing for an attack that would come from an unexpected direction, while maintaining the appearance of following the false orders visible through the Griffin system. Phase 1 complete, Maya reported to Colonel Reeves. General Morrison is aware of the compromise and has acknowledged the real tactical intelligence. Now we wait to see if the enemy takes the bait. The waiting was excruciating. Maya found herself staring at the intelligence feeds, looking for any indication of enemy movement that would suggest their deception was working. The attack could come at any moment, and there was no way to know if their countermeasures would be effective until it was too late to change course. Dr. Harrison appeared in the war room around midnight, escorted by security personnel who had been ordered to brief him on the situation. Maya watched nervously as her former supervisor learned that the junior engineer he had dismissed as incompetent was now running a critical military operation. "I don't understand," Dr. Harrison said, his voice tight with confusion and anger. "How did we get to the point where we're depending on an unproven contractor to save a general's life? This should be handled by experienced military personnel, not someone who barely understands the systems involved." Colonel Reeves fixed Dr. Harrison with a cold stare. "Dr. Harrison, Ms. Chen is the only person who fully understands both the vulnerability and the systems architecture necessary to implement this operation. Your team's failure to take her security warnings seriously is the reason we're in this situation." "My team followed proper protocols," Dr. Harrison protested. "We couldn't waste resources chasing every theoretical concern raised by junior staff members." Maya forced herself to remain focused on her screens, but she could feel the tension in the room escalating. Part of her felt vindicated that her warnings had been proven correct, but mostly she felt scared and overwhelmed by the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. The first indication that their plan was working came at 0347 hours local time. Satellite imagery showed enemy forces moving toward the eastern perimeter of forward operating base Delta, exactly as predicted by the false intelligence they had fed through the compromised Griffin system. "They're taking the bait," Maya announced, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Enemy units are massing for an assault on the eastern defensive positions. General Morrison should have approximately 2 hours to complete her preparations." Colonel Reeves immediately activated the secure communication channel to relay real-time intelligence about the enemy movements. General Morrison's forces began their carefully orchestrated deception, making it appear that they were caught off guard by the attack while actually preparing a devastating counteroffensive. As dawn broke over the desert, the enemy launched their assault exactly where Maya's false intelligence had suggested they should. What they expected to find was a lightly defended position that they could overrun quickly. Instead, they walked into the most heavily fortified section of the base, where General Morrison had concentrated her best troops and heaviest weapons. The battle lasted less than 3 hours. Enemy forces that had planned to achieve complete surprise found themselves trapped in a carefully prepared kill zone. General Morrison's counterattack was swift and decisive, routing the enemy forces and capturing valuable intelligence about their broader operational plans. Maya watched the tactical reports flowing in, hardly able to believe that her cybersecurity work had played such a crucial role in a military victory. The same vulnerability that her colleagues had dismissed as theoretical paranoia had been turned into a weapon that saved hundreds of lives and prevented a major defeat. Colonel Reeves placed a hand on Maya's shoulder as the final enemy units retreated into the desert. Outstanding work, Ms. Chen. Your expertise and dedication have made the difference between victory and disaster today. Dr. Harrison stood nearby, his face pale as he began to understand the full implications of what had just happened. The junior engineer he had tried to silence had not only been right about the security vulnerability, but had used her knowledge to save General Morrison's life and win a significant tactical victory. I had no idea, Dr. Harrison stammered. Maya, I owe you an apology. We should have listened to your concerns from the beginning. Maya looked at her former supervisor, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. Dr. Harrison, the important thing is that we were able to fix the problem before anyone got hurt. But we need to make sure this never happens again. When someone raises legitimate security concerns, those concerns need to be taken seriously, regardless of who raises them. As the immediate crisis passed, Maya realized that her life was about to change dramatically. Word of her role in the operation would spread through military and defense contractor circles. She would no longer be dismissed as an inexperienced junior engineer, but she also knew that with recognition would come new challenges and responsibilities she had never imagined. The response from the Inspector General's office came faster than Maya had expected. 3 days after submitting her report, she received a call from Colonel Sarah Reeves, a cybersecurity specialist who had been assigned to investigate her claims. Unlike the dismissive treatment Maya had received from her colleagues, Colonel Reeves listened carefully to every detail, asking pointed technical questions that showed she understood both the complexity of the system and the severity of the potential threat. Ms. Chen, Colonel Reeves said during their first phone conversation, I need you to understand the seriousness of what you're alleging. If you're correct, we're looking at a potential national security disaster. But if you're wrong, you could be destroying your career and wasting critical resources on a false alarm. Maya felt her stomach clench with nervousness, but her voice remained steady. Colonel, I understand the implications completely. I've checked and rechecked my work dozens of times. The vulnerability is real, and someone is already exploiting it. I have all the documentation to prove it. The investigation that followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced in her short career. Colonel Reeves brought in a team of independent security experts who spent 2 weeks going through every aspect of Maya's findings. They replicated her tests, verified her mathematical proofs, and confirmed the existence of the network intrusions she had discovered. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the defense facility became toxic for Maya. Word had leaked that she had gone outside the chain of command with her security concerns, and her colleagues treated her like a traitor. Dr. Harrison called her into his office for what he termed a career counseling session, but was actually a thinly veiled threat. Maya, I want you to understand that what you've done has consequences, he said, his face red with anger. You've undermined the credibility of this entire project and wasted taxpayer money on a wild goose chase. When this investigation concludes and finds nothing wrong, your reputation in this industry will be finished. No one will ever hire someone who can't follow proper channels or respect the judgment of their superiors. Maya listened silently, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. She had committed herself to this path, and she would have to live with whatever consequences followed. The hardest part was the doubt that crept in during quiet moments. What if she really was wrong? What if the experts were right, and she was just an inexperienced engineer who had misunderstood something fundamental about the system's design? Those doubts vanished when Colonel Reeves called with the investigation results. Ms. Chen, I need to inform you that your findings have been validated by our independent security team. The Griffin HX-9 system has a critical vulnerability that could compromise military operations. More concerning, we've confirmed that hostile actors have been actively probing the system for several weeks. The relief Maya felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by alarm when Colonel Reeves continued. We're implementing emergency security protocols immediately. The Griffin HX-9 deployment has been postponed indefinitely while we work on fixes. However, There's a complication you need to know about. Maya's heart sank. What kind of complication? General Morrison is currently deployed with an early prototype of the system at Forward Operating Base Delta. She insisted on field testing the basic communication functions before the full rollout. According to our intelligence, the same group that's been probing the main system has now shifted their focus to the prototype. They appear to be planning something significant. The news hit Maya like a physical blow. While she had been fighting to get people to listen to her warnings, General Morrison had already taken a vulnerable version of the system into an active combat zone. The prototype didn't have all the security features of the final version, making it even more susceptible to the exploit Maya had discovered. "What can we do?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Reeves paused before answering. "We're working on emergency patches, but implementing them in a hostile environment is extremely challenging. The bigger problem is that we don't know exactly what the attackers are planning or when they might strike. General Morrison needs to be warned, but we can't use normal communication channels because they might be compromised." Over the next 48 hours, Maya found herself pulled into emergency planning sessions with military cybersecurity specialists and senior Defense Department officials. Her expertise on the Griffin HX-9 vulnerability made her indispensable to the team working on solutions, even though many of the career military officers clearly resented having to rely on someone so young and inexperienced. The situation at Forward Operating Base Delta was deteriorating rapidly. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were massing for a coordinated attack, and General Morrison was counting on the Griffin HX-9 prototype to coordinate her defensive response. What she didn't know was that her enemies might have complete access to her battle plans, troop movements, and supply logistics. Maya worked around the clock with the cybersecurity team, developing patches and countermeasures that could be implemented remotely. But every solution they proposed ran into the same problem. They couldn't be sure the patches would reach their destination without being intercepted and corrupted by the same attackers who had compromised the system. The breakthrough came when Maya remembered something from her childhood working in her family's computer repair shop. Her father had taught her that sometimes the old methods worked better than the new ones, especially when dealing with sophisticated attacks that targeted modern security systems. "What if we don't try to fix the system remotely?" Maya suggested during one particularly frustrating planning session. "What if we use the vulnerability against itself?" The room fell silent as the senior officers and cybersecurity experts tried to understand what she meant. Maya stood up and moved to the whiteboard, her nervousness forgotten as she focused on the technical problem. "The attackers are using our own system against us, right? They're exploiting the vulnerability to intercept and potentially corrupt our communications. But that same vulnerability could work in reverse. If we can identify their entry point, we could feed them false information while using alternative channels to communicate real intelligence to General Morrison." Colonel Reeves leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "You're talking about a counterintelligence operation. Use the compromised system as bait while maintaining secure communications through a parallel channel." Maya nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We let them think they're seeing our real battle plans while General Morrison receives actual orders through a completely different system. When they attack based on false intelligence, she'll be ready for them." The plan was audacious and risky, but it was also their best option, given the time constraints they faced. Maya found herself appointed as the technical lead for the operation, working directly with Colonel Reeves to implement the deception protocol. It was a level of responsibility she had never imagined when she first started working on the Griffin HX-9 project. As they prepared to implement the counterintelligence operation, Maya couldn't help but think about the irony of her situation. The colleagues who had dismissed her as an incompetent junior engineer were now depending on her expertise to save General Morrison and potentially thousands of soldiers. The system they had insisted was unhackable was about to be used as a weapon against the very people who had created it. Maya Chen had always been different from her colleagues at the Defense Technology Facility. While others wore expensive suits and carried themselves with the confidence that came from prestigious degrees, Maya arrived each morning in simple clothes, her worn laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She was the youngest person ever hired for the Griffin HX-9 project, a cutting-edge military communication system that would revolutionize how commanders coordinated operations in the field. The other engineers looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. Dr. Harrison, the project lead, had made it clear during her first week that she was only there because of diversity quotas. "Don't expect special treatment," he had warned her, his voice cold as winter steel. "This isn't a place for learning on the job." Maya had nodded quietly, understanding that she would have to prove herself twice as hard as anyone else. She had grown up in a small town where her family ran a computer repair shop. While other kids played video games, Maya was taking apart motherboards and rebuilding them from scratch. Her parents, immigrants who had sacrificed everything for their children's education, had worked double shifts to send her to community college before she transferred to the state university. The Griffin HX-9 system was supposed to be unhackable. It used quantum encryption and multiple layers of security protocols that the military had spent billions developing. Maya's job was to test these security measures, to try to find weaknesses before the system went live. It was considered grunt work by the senior engineers, the kind of task they assigned to the newcomer while they focused on the real engineering challenges. Every morning, Maya would sit at her desk in the corner of the lab, surrounded by towers of servers and blinking lights. The other engineers rarely spoke to her except to give instructions or criticize her work. During lunch breaks, they would gather around the conference table, discussing technical challenges and sharing war stories from previous projects. Maya was never invited to join these conversations. "She probably doesn't even understand half of what we're talking about," she overheard Dr. Peterson saying one day. "I heard she went to some no-name state school. How did she even get security clearance?" The comment stung, but Maya channeled her frustration into her work. She spent long hours after everyone else had gone home, running test after test on the Griffin HX-9 system. She studied every line of code, every protocol, every connection point. While her colleagues saw her dedication as proof that she was struggling to keep up, Maya was actually discovering something troubling. The quantum encryption that everyone praised as unbreakable had a flaw. It was subtle, hidden deep in the mathematical algorithms that governed how the system generated its security keys. Most engineers would never have found it because they trusted the theoretical foundation too much to question it. But Maya had learned early in life to question everything, especially when people told her something was impossible to break. She tried to bring her concerns to Dr. Harrison, but he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "The encryption protocol was designed by some of the best minds in cryptography," he told her. "I don't think a junior engineer is going to find problems that PhDs from MIT missed." Maya persisted, showing him the specific vulnerabilities she had identified, but Dr. Harrison's expression grew increasingly annoyed. "Maya, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're wasting time chasing shadows. The system has already passed all security audits. Focus on your assigned tasks and let the senior engineers handle the big picture." The dismissal was humiliating, especially with other team members watching. Maya returned to her desk, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She could hear whispered conversations behind her, colleagues making jokes about the overconfident rookie who thought she knew better than the experts, but Maya couldn't let it go. The flaw she had discovered wasn't theoretical. It was real, and it could compromise the entire system. She began documenting everything meticulously, creating detailed reports that showed exactly how an attacker could exploit the vulnerability. She worked through weekends, surviving on coffee and determination, building proof-of-concept demonstrations that showed the hack in action. The more she discovered, the more serious the problem became. The Griffin HX-9 system wasn't just vulnerable to a simple data breach. The flaw she had found could allow an enemy to not only intercept communications, but actually feed false information into the network. In a combat situation, this could lead to friendly fire incidents, misdirected supply drops, or worse, troops walking into ambushes because they received corrupted intelligence. Maya tried once more to get Dr. Harrison's attention, preparing a comprehensive presentation that laid out the vulnerability in clear, undeniable terms. She requested a meeting with the full security team, hoping that if she could explain the problem to everyone at once, They would have to take it seriously. The meeting was a disaster. Dr. Harrison introduced her presentation with obvious reluctance, making it clear that he considered it a waste of everyone's time. As Maya clicked through her slides, explaining the mathematical proof of the vulnerability, she could see eyes glazing over around the conference table. Dr. Peterson actually checked his phone multiple times, not even pretending to pay attention. When she finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Dr. Harrison spoke. "Maya, I think you're getting lost in theoretical possibilities. Yes, on paper your scenario might be possible, but in practice, it would require resources and expertise that our adversaries simply don't possess. The Griffin HX9 has been tested extensively by teams with far more experience than you have. But sir," Maya interjected, "I've actually demonstrated the exploit. I can show you exactly how—" "That's enough," Dr. Harrison cut her off. "I think it's time you focused on the tasks you were actually hired to perform. Leave the strategic security analysis to those of us who have been doing this for decades." The other engineers nodded in agreement, some looking genuinely annoyed that their time had been wasted on what they saw as a junior engineer's paranoid fantasies. Maya gathered her materials, her face hot with shame and frustration. As she left the conference room, she heard Dr. Peterson's stage whisper, "Someone needs to explain to her what junior means." That evening, Maya sat alone at her desk long after everyone else had gone home. The office was quiet except for the hum of servers and the distant sound of traffic outside. She stared at her computer screen, looking at the lines of code that proved the system was vulnerable, wondering if she was crazy to think she had found something that teams of experts had missed. But she knew she wasn't wrong. The mathematics didn't lie, and neither did her successful demonstrations of the exploit. The question was what to do about it when nobody wanted to listen. The weeks following Maya's dismissed presentation were the hardest of her professional life. The atmosphere in the lab became even more hostile, with colleagues treating her like she was a troublemaker who couldn't accept her place in the hierarchy. Dr. Harrison assigned her to increasingly mundane tasks, checking cable connections, running routine diagnostic scans, updating software patches on secondary systems. It was busy work designed to keep her occupied and away from anything important. Maya watched helplessly as the Griffin HX9 project moved toward its final testing phase. The system was scheduled to be deployed to Forward Operating Base Delta in 3 months, where General Patricia Morrison would personally oversee its first real-world implementation. General Morrison was a legend in military circles, known for her tactical brilliance and her ability to coordinate complex multi-unit operations. The Griffin HX9 would be the nerve center of her command structure, handling communications for over 5,000 troops spread across multiple bases. Despite being marginalized at work, Maya couldn't stop thinking about the vulnerability she had discovered. Late at night, she continued her research, diving deeper into the system's architecture and discovering that the flaw was even worse than she had initially thought. The exploit didn't just allow interception of communications. It could actually grant an attacker administrative access to the entire network, letting them control everything from supply logistics to weapon systems. She tried different approaches to get people to listen. Maya drafted emails to senior management, but they were either ignored or forwarded back to Dr. Harrison with notes about keeping junior staff focused on their assigned responsibilities. She attempted to schedule meetings with other project leads, but found herself blocked at every turn by administrative assistants who had clearly been instructed not to give her access to important decision-makers. The isolation was crushing. Maya had never been popular at work, but now she found herself completely ostracized. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Colleagues who had previously been civil now treated her with open disdain. During team meetings, her questions were dismissed without consideration, and her suggestions were met with eye rolls and sighs of exasperation. Dr. Peterson made his feelings especially clear during one particularly tense team meeting. "Some people," he said, looking directly at Maya, "need to learn that there's a difference between being thorough and being paranoid. When you're new to an organization, it's important to trust the expertise of people who have been doing this work since before you were born. Maya's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to remain silent. She had learned that defending herself only made things worse, giving her colleagues more ammunition to use against her. Instead, she channeled her frustration into her work, continuing to document the vulnerability and refine her proof-of-concept exploits. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Maya was running a routine scan on one of the backup servers when she noticed something odd in the network traffic logs. There were connection attempts from an external IP address, attempts that should have been impossible given the system's supposed security protocols. When she traced the connections, she discovered that someone was already exploiting the vulnerability she had identified. Her blood ran cold as she realized what she was looking at. An unknown attacker had found the same flaw in the Griffin HX9 system and was using it to map the network architecture. They weren't stealing data yet, but they were clearly preparing for a larger attack. The connection logs showed systematic probing that had been going on for weeks, slowly building a complete picture of the system's vulnerabilities. Maya immediately tried to alert the security team, but ran into the same walls she had encountered before. Her emails were ignored, her phone calls were not returned, and when she tried to approach Dr. Harrison directly, he told her bluntly that she was no longer authorized to access security-related systems. "Maya, I've had enough of your conspiracy theories," he said, not even looking up from his computer screen. "You're clearly having trouble distinguishing between your test scenarios and reality. I think it would be best if you took some time off to get your head straight." The implication was clear. Question the system again, and she would lose her job. Maya returned to her desk, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She stared at the evidence on her screen, knowing that the Griffin HX9 system was actively being compromised, while the people responsible for protecting it refused to listen to her warnings. That night, Maya faced the hardest decision of her career. She could stay quiet, keep her job, and hope that nothing bad happened when the system went live. Or she could risk everything by going outside the chain of command to warn someone who might actually listen. She thought about General Morrison, who would soon be trusting her life and the lives of thousands of soldiers to a system that Maya knew was compromised. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her the education and opportunities that led to this moment. She thought about all the people who had dismissed her warnings, treating her like an incompetent child rather than a skilled engineer who had found a real threat. Maya made her choice. She began compiling a comprehensive report that documented not just the original vulnerability she had discovered, but also the evidence of active exploitation. She included every piece of proof she had gathered, every test she had run, every failed attempt to get her colleagues to listen. It was a risk that could destroy her career, but she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent while people's lives were in danger. The report took her 3 days to complete. She worked through the nights, double-checking every detail, making sure her evidence was bulletproof. She knew she would only get one chance to make her case, and it had to be perfect. When she finished, Maya faced another dilemma. Who could she trust to take her seriously? Going to her immediate supervisors was clearly pointless. She considered reaching out to the press, but military security protocols made that both illegal and ineffective. Finally, she remembered something her computer science professor had mentioned years ago about military whistleblower protections for contractors working on classified projects. After hours of research, Maya found her answer. There was an inspector general's office that handled security concerns on defense projects, specifically designed to provide a safe channel for reporting problems that local management was unwilling to address. It was risky. Filing a report would definitely get back to Dr. Harrison and probably cost her job, but it was the only legitimate path she could find. Maya spent another sleepless night crafting her submission to the Inspector General's office. She knew she had to be careful about how she presented the information, focusing on the technical facts rather than her personal grievances with her colleagues. She attached all of her documentation, including the proof-of-concept exploits and the evidence of ongoing network intrusions. As dawn broke over the city, Maya submitted her report. She sat back in her chair, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. She had done everything she could to protect the system and the people who would depend on it. Now all she could do was wait and hope that someone in authority would finally take her warning seriously before it was too late.